Counselor Accents Podcast. Two school counselors who love their jobs. Oh, and they happen to have Southern accents too. Bless their hearts.
Okay, Laura, this is a very, very different podcast than anything we've ever done before. Of course, you know the subject matter is dark and depressing and something that we really would rather avoid having to talk about. But it's real and it's happening, and we feel like as school counselors we could be an integral part in we hope we are an integral part in keeping students safe. So how is this podcast going to be different than our other podcasts?
Well, I'd like for us to think of it as more of a training, because it's going to be a lot of information and there are some stories sprinkled in. And Kim, you and I are recording this right now after having talked to Joe. And so we know that when she told stories, we were able to, I don't know about you, but I was thinking in my head, students that I have or have had that fit these stories. And so I believe that as you listen to her tell these stories, school counselors, educators, you will also think of, oh my goodness, that reminds me of such and such. And our hope is that through the information that Joe shares, that there won't be any more stories like that. We'll catch them before they happen.
And, Laura, it is a lot of information about trafficking, but I think, knowledge is power. And when you know more, you do more. And so I think it's so important that we, even though we don't want to hear about it, that we listen and learn as much as we can so that we're informed, as she says, not fearful, but informed in order to help our students. So, Laura, in thinking, do you think that this, in having heard what Joe is about to say, and I know what you're going to answer, what your answer is going to be, do you think that this is applicable to all levels of school counselors?
Yes, it is applicable to every age group. High schools and middle schools, obviously, because that's the age range that they're talking about. But Joe will say something as she's talking that really struck me. She said 10 is the new 13, that where she used to share this information as young as 13, now 10-year-olds are falling into this age bracket of needing to hear. Not only that, so that hits you elementary counselors, but not only that, elementary students have siblings that are older. And I don't want to throw any spoilers out there, and we'll talk about this more in detail, but as she points out, it's the bystanders that share the information with people who can help. It's the people who have heard the signs and see what's going on. They're the ones that have stepped in to help. So that's why it's important at every age range.
So buckle up and get ready for a emotional roller coaster, and I think it's going to be well worth your time.
I'm Laura Rancorn.
And I'm Kim Crumbly, and together we are Counselor Accents. And Laura, you did it. I just want to say you did it. I don't know how you did it, but you did it. Kim, and I'm so excited.
Don't underestimate me ever, because I will go to great lengths to hunt people down when I want them on our podcast. And I wanted Joe Lembo on our podcast, and that is who is with us today. Oh my goodness. We are always excited about our episodes, but this one, I don't even have the words for it. I'm so thrilled.
This is special.
So I had heard of Shared Hope International when years ago. I was listening to a radio program in the morning, and they were talking about human trafficking. And at that time, I was working at a school, but I thought, oh, this doesn't happen here. This is not relevant to where I am. So I almost changed the channel. But they hooked me. I kept listening, and I'm so glad I did, because it has really changed the way that I view human trafficking. And so when you and I were talking about it, I did hunt down Shared Hope International, called them multiple times to get in touch with who I needed to get in touch with. And here she is with us. Jo Lembo, we are so honored to have you with us today.
Thank you, Laura and Kim. It's just a pleasure. We had so much fun on our introductory Zoom call that I just have been looking forward to this so much, and spending time with you and with those that you are helping to protect children. So let me give you my official title in case anybody's ever looking for me. I am Jo Lembo. There's another Laura out there trying to track me down. I'm Shared Hope's Director for National Outreach and our Faith Initiatives. So that's my title, and that's what I do. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Shared Hope International is a national and an international faith-based organization. We have 2 offices. One is in Washington State. That's our finance department, our faith initiative, our donor relations, our awareness programs, and our prevention education nationwide. And then we have a legal team that operates out of our institute in Washington, D.C., just 2 blocks from the White House. And they help craft legislation and give legal advice to legislators, to judges, prosecutors regarding the trafficking of U.S. children here on our soil. That office also oversees our PR, our marketing, and our restoration programs. We have domestic and international programs. Currently, we fund homes in Jamaica, Nepal, and India. There are 4 of them. And we work with partners for restoration in the U.S. So in the U.S., we find people who are doing a great work and just need a little push to get over that bump and to be successful. Maybe they need to hire an executive director. Maybe they need to build a building, or maybe they need to fund a particular position. And so we seek them out, we find them, and then we work with them for 1 to 3 years. And in that time, we want to see that they are able to be self-sustaining. Now, with our international partners, because of the cultural surrounding them, victims of trafficking oftentimes aren't really considered people. They're not even able to get birth certificates many times. And those villages aren't really able to accrue local church support because they may be surrounded by other cultures that view prostituted victims as that's their lot in life. And if they are the very best prostitute they can be, they'll come back in a better way in another life. And so there's really no empathy and ability to get support around them. So we've stayed with our international partners for, from our beginning, 1998. It's been a joy. We've been able to watch little girls that came in when they were 4 and 5, and now they're married and they have their college degrees and they have jobs and they have meaningful professions, and a couple of them have had babies. And we're just watching that seed planted by Shared Hope in their lives back in 1998 has now brought a wonderful harvest of amazing human beings who are making a difference in the world where they live. So it's really cool. Now, why I'm here today? To help you recognize the signs of trafficking and how to help protect children so they won't be vulnerable to traffickers. That's it in a nutshell. The survivors that we work with have all told us if we had known, this wouldn't have happened to us. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm here to do today, is put the tools in your hands so that you know, and when you know what to do with that, and children will be safer because of that. Now, we are Shared Hope. We're not shared fear. We're not shared paranoia. We're not here to scare you to death, because it is a pretty dark world. But we want you to know this may never happen to the children in your classrooms and the children in your life. But if it did, you would know what to look for and you would know what to do. So we can promise that if we share this information with you and that you know what to look for, then there's a good chance that it won't happen to those children, because we simply can't see what we don't know exists. So today is an overview of what we call domestic minor sex trafficking. You'll hear it described as DMST, and that's simply domestic, which is children legally in the U.S., minors under the age of 18. Sex trafficking is a definition for being sold for commercial exploitation. Now, this includes any sex act performed by a minor in exchange for anything of value. That can be a ride home in bad weather, that can be transportation, that can be a place to stay, it can be drugs or alcohol, it can be any type of gift. It doesn't have to be money. But if you engage a child in a sex act in exchange for anything of value, that is by federal definition sex trafficking, child sex trafficking. So this training highlights that our own US born children, which accounts for about 85 to 95% of those children who are trafficked. This doesn't mean that we don't care about foreign nationals. It doesn't mean that we don't care about adults or others in labor trafficking, but rather it means that the bulk of those who are being trafficked or may be trafficked, you have the opportunity to hear them. You have the opportunity to teach them how to be careful. The main potential for the audience who is at risk is right in front of us. So I'm thrilled to be here because that's our goal. That's what we want to do. And that's what I do. That's what gets me up in the morning. So I'm going to cover four things: what trafficking looks like in the US, who's vulnerable and why, what tactics are used by traffickers, and then what is an effective response for school personnel and for the public in general. Ready to get started? Is there anything else you want to say before we fasten our seatbelts?
I should have fastened it already. I'm already completely blown away by what the words coming out of your mouth right now. So we're ready and excited. Thank you, Joe.
Awesome. Well, I love what I do. I love it. I feel like when I read the Renting Lacey book, which was Linda Smith's second book, it's about America's prostituted children, my life changed forever. And my husband's life changed. We actually both left. We were pastors in South Seattle. We both left that ministry and entered into this ministry, and we have both been fighting trafficking to protect children nationwide ever since. So as we begin today, I just want you to realize that I'm going to speak in generalities. There are many kinds of trafficking. Probably I could name 25 types just like that in the US. So I'm going to address the most common ones that you might most likely see in your students and in your community. The basic premise is that boys and girls are both trafficked. From a law enforcement perspective, most are girls and most are U.S. children. So I generally speak from that standpoint, but males are definitely at risk and it's on a rise. And there are children that are brought to this country from other nations for commercial exploitation. But in general, I'm going to talk about U.S. victims of trafficking who are here legally. And law enforcement tell us the majority are females. What that number is, it's hard to tell because this is the underbelly of crime. These kids aren't being reported on W-2s. They're not even legal age to work, many of them. Pimps certainly aren't reporting their income. So I have to speak in generalities. I'm sorry, I can't tell you what state is the worst, what city is the worst, and none of us wants that title anyway. I just want you to know that we recognize both males and females. LGBTQ plus kids are particularly at risk. The second thing is some buyers are women. Most buyers are men. I refer to buyers as buyers, those who want to purchase commercial sex with a child in this case. I also call them predators, but I'll always identify whether I'm talking about a predator pimp or a predator buyer. Both are predators. Women as pimps is on the rise. We see that happen in particular when there's poverty situations that hit. We see it more along the borders, our southern borders, where there's more labor, farm labor, and that kind of thing. Just right across in Mexico, you'll see the cantinas and some of the brothels, and those are often run by madams. But most pimps, predators, traffickers are male. Now it happens to boys, girls, trans, LGBTQ, but the most common scenario in the US are females, and it's about 51% minors that are being sold. If you go into law enforcement statistics, they'll tell you that minors is just about more sales available for sale as are adults. Now, of course, all sites that have consenting adults for sale for sex all say they're 18 or older. They're all consenting adults. We'll talk a little bit more about how to identify when those are minors. Brown and black females are particularly at risk. They are sold by men who are pimp predators, and they are sold to men who are buyer predators. Without a demand to buy, there would be no need for the product to go to market. And that's something that gets really close to my heart because We have to get to the heart of these buyers. We have 1,244 trained volunteer ambassadors in 48 states and DC, and the primary focus is that we train them online. There's no cost for the training, and we teach them how to get the public to recognize when the grooming process is attempting to defraud a child into sex trafficking, into being sold for sex. These ambassadors are in schools, they're in churches, civic, city and state government. They're sharing the signs of trafficking and how to keep kids safe. They're an amazing bunch of volunteers. Now, most commonly in the U.S., I told you that there are about 25 different kinds of trafficking that I could probably rattle off, but I'm going to give you the 5 most common that we're going to see in the U.S. Number 1 is familial trafficking, and that is simply when family members pimp or sell their own children, oftentimes in exchange for drugs or rent, or it's not always just clear poverty cases, but with the opioid crisis on the rise in many places, in rural and mountainous areas, familial trafficking is on the rise. We also found that on some of the islands in Washington state. You would never think this, but on some islands that will remain unnamed, where Bill Gates' mother lives, it's very high-end island. It's very nice. It's beautiful. Their Chamber of Commerce is very proud of their resorts and their tourist traffic. And we went there to speak, and it was very difficult to get on the island because their chamber really didn't want us to come. But one influencer who lived there in a beautiful house up on a hill in the inner part of the island, she managed to bring us, and we shared these signs, and we were in a restaurant. And so I was setting up beforehand, and the salad lady was there setting up. And she said, "So who are you and what do you do?" And so I gave her my elevator speech. And she goes, "Oh, yeah, it happens here." She said, "We had 6 girls went off island a couple of years ago, and only 2 of them came back. This is exactly what happened to them." And law enforcement was very willing to talk with us and listen, but they just hadn't been aware that it was happening on their island. And I called the FBI and I said, "Do we have any live cases on this island?" And they said, "We really don't. But where there are children, internet, and people with money, you have trafficking." And so it was interesting to me that the salad lady at the restaurant was more aware of it than what the Chamber of Commerce wanted to face and say. And so we're really grateful for that woman who brought us there, because we were able to work with the local chapters. Actually, the ones who told us the most about trafficking were the domestic violence people. They said, "Oh yeah, we see this all the time." And they were able to understand better, and we were able to equip them better so that they had more tools to deal with that population. So familial trafficking is one. Some of those girls the salad lady was telling you about, were being trafficked by their family because it's a resort island. And one thing that tipped off our hostess, she said, "I live in a big house. I have a guest house. Lots of these people have big houses and guest house. They have a boat in the arbor that has more bedrooms and bathrooms, and yet they're renting hotel rooms just for one night 3 or 4 times a month." She goes, "Don't you think that's weird?" And I said, "Well, you would know better than I what the culture is of the island, but that seems unusual to me." She goes, "Because if you're going to have a guest, you're either going to have them in your home or let them stay on your boat. That's a fun, novel place to stay." She goes, "Why would you rent a hotel for one night 3 or 4 times a month?" She goes, "It's happening here." And so we were able to go, and we were very grateful for her opening that door. A second kind of trafficking that's common is gang trafficking. It's a system where they require members of their gang to be sold for sex as their contribution, also to engage in illegal activity like a mule for illegal arms or drugs. Sometimes they're obliged to go across borders or to do things that are completely illegal that keeps the main gang members out of the eye of law enforcement, and then these pawns are more used. Sometimes they're required to participate in gang killings until they are completely ensnared and obligated to stay with the gang or suffer great harm. These are often homeless kids. These are often kids with such horrendous home lives that they're looking for a family. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but the gang actually becomes their family. A third kind of trafficking is the one that's a little bit more common. People talk about it, the white van and being abducted and forced drug abuse. And that would be a guerrilla pimp or a violent pimp that operates by violence. And this is a less common type of trafficking in the U.S., but probably the most depicted in movies. such as taken, which is prostitution through the use of force. So it's the one that people will talk about the most, but the reason that we try to shine a light on all these different types of trafficking is because if someone is looking for a white van in their neighborhood to snatch a kid and run, they're not going to be looking at the kid who's on the swing set and that nice lady is saying, well, you want to come to my house and I have cookies and I have a playmate for you. We have great toys. And then they're going to walk that kid over to their house and that kid may go home at night. But now they know they have to go to that house after school every day, and there are pictures being taken and there are men visiting and they're being sold in the very worst ways. And that child is still living at home and under threat of violence to them or their family. They have to obey. Now that's an actual story I just told you about. So the guerrilla pimp is one that uses violence and coercion against the child, and they ensure that they have their compliance. There's no love lost, but they ensure fear and violence. Now, another type of trafficking that's fairly common is the survival trafficking. It used to be called survival sex. Actually, what's happening is this is rape for profit. And for a kid on the streets who's the most vulnerable, their basic needs aren't being met. Although a pimp predator may not be visible, the child exchanges sex acts for food, shelter, clothing, protection. They're still being trafficked because remember the federal law that we talked about at the beginning, any minor engaged in a sex act for commercial remuneration, anything of value, that is by federal law, that is sex trafficking. So pimps are never far away. If they're observing this kind of desperation, they will certainly recruit that child and offer them safety in exchange for their body. So familial trafficking is one. So those are the first four that I wanted to share with you. Now the fifth one, and the most common in the US, is what we would call a boyfriend or a Romeo pimp. The reason we use the word Romeo is because it's a fraudulent relationship. It can begin online or in person, and it develops trust and dependence. And this is the one you're going to see the most often. I'm going to give you signs to watch for here in a little bit, and I will include some signs to watch for gang and for familial. The violent one, the gorilla pimp, sometimes the kid just disappears. And of course we care and we want to report that. We want the police to get on it, but you may not have any clues to watch for with that one. But these other ones are pretty basic. So Shared Hope has developed a film series. We just updated it this last November, released it in January, and it's called Domestic Minor Sex Trafficking, DMST. And it covers the vulnerabilities of kids who are at risk. Now, as counselors, as teachers, as caring adults, these are the kids we would assume are going to be trafficked. These are the kids we'd be watching. And so what makes a kid vulnerable? You'll recognize some of these things I'm going to list from Adverse Childhood Experiences scale, from the ACE scale. And that's sexual, verbal, or physical abuse, drug or substance abuse, addictions, an unstable home environment, poverty, we talked a bit about that. Truancy, that's something you would recognize. Homelessness, that might be something that shows up that would be recognizable. And an incarcerated or an absent parent due to divorce, death, or even poverty. One story in West Virginia, one of our ambassadors got to meet the law enforcement officers who actually made this bust, but there was a man in the city that was reaching out to 12-year-old girls and offering them Ugg boots. Now, this was several years ago. Ugg boots were a thing. Every kid wanted them. And he simply was reaching out to kids and offering them Ugg boots and cigarettes, or Ugg boots and pizza. None of those three things could these kids afford. There were 12-year-olds, and he recruited about 10 of them before he was stopped, and he was simply paying them with Ugg boots, pizza, and cigarettes. Before it was noticed, the police were able to go in and arrest the guy because he wasn't taking his kids away. They were still living at home. They were still going to school, but he was forcing them into prostitution acts, evenings, weekends, and even sometimes during lunchtime from school. And these were 12-year-olds. But all kids that are at risk experience, think about when we were kids. Now, it's been a while since I was a kid, but you can feel disconnected. You can feel looking for a future. You have hopes and dreams that you can't see any way to fulfill. You might be insecure and lonely. Aren't we all insecure? And weren't we all lonely at some point in our teenage lives? There may be trouble at home, any kind of trouble that makes you feel like things are unstable. You might feel misunderstood or minimized. One survivor said to us, sometimes we meet these really rich girls and we're like, what are you doing out here? And they say, nobody's ever home. Dad travels with business, might be very busy with his business, and mom might be a benevolent charity worker or somebody who's super involved in her community and just never home. And so these kids feel like they don't have anyone who notices them, and that makes them very vulnerable to the attentions of a trafficker, predator. Maybe they just want to fit in. Hello, that's all of us. They want to be loved. That's something God's put in our hearts. Everyone wants to be loved. We all want to be loved. Kids are super vulnerable in that early tween age, finding out who they are and making friends. And that circle of friends usually stays with them pretty much through, junior high, high school. So at that crucial time where they're kind of figuring out who they are and what kind of friends they want and what kind of friend they want to be, they're super vulnerable during that time. Just look online. There's so many Netflix that tell you about suicides and bullying and sexting and cyber stalking and shame from pictures. Kids will, they're all sharing these nude pictures. And so then the couple breaks up. I say that loosely, they're 12 years old, but and then that picture is then shared, and so then it's shaming, and they call it slut shaming, and then all of a sudden that person's not in the crowd anymore, and there's just all these things. When we were kids, if you wanted to take a picture of yourself and share it with someone, it took like 2 weeks. You took the picture, you took it to the drugstore, they'd send it away, it got developed, it came back, you picked it up. By then you either lost interest, or the person that you were going to give it to isn't yours anymore, and so it wasn't like this instant sexting and exploitation that can happen, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But basically, all these things I just described are vulnerabilities. It just goes along with being a kid. Every kid can be vulnerable. Now, I didn't say every kid is trafficked. I didn't say every kid will be approached. But every kid can be vulnerable. And that's why you are so very important, because of the work you do. You see these kids, you have benchmarks, you know who they are, you know if there's changes, and you also have training that help you to reach out to them and care for them and be there for them. One thing that's important to notice is that traffickers take their time. Stranger danger warnings don't really work, because traffickers become so familiar that they are no longer considered a stranger. They will take time to build familiarity before they'll ever approach a kid, even online. They will get to know them. They'll cyber stalk them. That's why it's so important that kids learn not to share personal information, where you go to school, turn off your locators on your pictures. They can find your home, and they know where your bedroom is based on the locators of where you take pictures. And you don't want to post your school schedule. You don't want to post that you go to track every day at 4, Monday, Thursday, and Friday. You don't want anyone who's looking at your page that can see your page. In about 3 clicks, they can find out where you are at what time and find you. So we really work with kids to be very careful about sharing private information. But much of that familiarity comes through the internet, and they will watch a kid long enough. They'll know your dog's name. They'll know the fact that you love music. They'll know that you're a soccer player. They'll know where your grandma lives. They'll know everything about you. Who your siblings drive you nuts. They'll know when your mom and you are having a fight, because you're sharing all of this. And then they take time and they make their move, and they'll pose as the person that that child can trust. And then they begin to build a relationship. We're going to talk a bit more about that. Right now, I want to give you about 5 ways, the progression of grooming. Now, you understand grooming is the process by which someone spots an at-risk child, begins to build relationship, and then brings them to the point where they're able to either take them and completely control them, or control them, but they're still living at home, going to youth group, and going to school. So there's several different ways this can play out, but this is in general how it works. First, they build trust. They find out their dreams, hopes, and fears, and then they become the person who will fulfill them. They say things like, I know your stepdad has abused you. I won't touch you unless you want me to. I trust you. Generally, a relationship with the Romeo boyfriend pimp is not threatening and is not sexual for quite a long time. There's a long time that they build that trust. By a long time, I mean it could be 3 months, it could be 2 years, and I'll explain why. They might say, I know you've been hurt before. I would never do that to you. I love you, and I only want what's best for you. I'll always be here for you. So if you are hearing kids talking to one another, and then he said, da 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 da, and you're hearing some of these things, you want to make some mental notes. The second stage is generally tearing down boundaries. This is where they begin to separate that child from their networks. It's a process. You're too smart to have a curfew. What are your parents thinking? Treating you like a child. This town is too small for someone as talented as you. I can show you the big city. We can have the life of the rich and famous. You're too mature for guys your age. You belong with guys that know how to treat a woman like you. She's 14, a woman like you. But there's flattery, and there's compliments, and there's safety. It's a very safe relationship until trust is built. You could make it big as a model. You could make it big as an actress, a singer. You really don't need to waste time with school. I know people who can make you a star right now. And those are things that they're going to start telling this child. Very common, very common. Pimps only have X amount of things that they can try on a kid. And these things I'm telling you are very common. Another one, this is kind of like in that second phase. Let me take some pictures of you that will make you famous. Or if they're online, send me pictures of yourself so I can help make you famous. And the requests become more and more persuasive, more forceful, and more demanding. I'm just trying to help you, girl. Send me something that'll attract your attention. These pictures are a dime a dozen. I need something that'll make you stand out. Take off your shirt. Send me a picture of you naked from the waist down. Just, you don't have to show your face. Just, And so they start that way. Other lines they'll use if the kid is from a very difficult home environment, perhaps they come from an addicted home or real poverty. Your life is hard, and I want to make it better. I'm here for you. And then I love this one. I know how we can make a lot of money. I know how we can make a lot of money. And the kid believes that. The third thing is I mentioned remove a child from their familiar networks. They'll start saying things like, you can really only trust me. Nobody else understands you and knows who you really are. I can help you get what you want. I know you want to be an actress. I can do that. I have connections. There's promises that are a result of them knowing that kid's hopes and dreams and fears, and they become that person. They'll say, no one really cares about what you want. Everybody's just trying to control you. I'm going to take care of you. We're going to make sure you get what you want. And then they'll begin to lie about those who are in the child's place in their life to bring safety. Parents, teachers, counselors, social workers, they just want to control you. You're smart enough to make your own decisions. Come with me. We can make that happen. You can be your own boss. You shouldn't be told what to do. You're way too smart for that. And then after they've begun to break down those familiar networks, they begin to create new ones. We're family now. We all take care of each other. You belong to us. You're just like us. And then that personal, I love you, baby. I want you all to myself. And he begins to monitor who she's with, what she's saying, where she is, what she's doing. And then he begins to exact punishment for ignoring demands. So she'll comply. The punishment may be rewards for compliance and emotional manipulation. Push you away if you don't do what I want. She's 13, she's 15. She doesn't have a way to process all of this manipulation, and she believes what he's saying is true, particularly because he spent a very long time being exactly what he said he was going to be. He would be kind to her. He would care about her. He would treat her to things she couldn't afford. And then sometimes violence will be introduced along with this push you, pull you thing. He might say, I don't like that. If you wouldn't push my buttons, I wouldn't have to treat you this way. Just do what I say. And for those of us who have any background in domestic violence, understanding that is the same as domestic violence right there. It's your fault. You pushed my buttons. You knew better, which always keeps her trying, always keeps her wanting to win back his affection and his positive attentions. And eventually her friends will drift away. And all she's got is this pimp network that he's established around her. Because he's taught her to push her friends away. She becomes non-communicative. She's never available. She has secrets, and she knows she can't share them because he's also threatening to burn her grandmother's house down, or he puts a dead animal in the mailbox, or he threatens to go get her little sister, and he sends her pictures of her standing at a bus stop. And that's a true story I just told you. So then he begins to make his demands. And his demands are, I want to meet you if he's been online. No one has to know. I'm safe. You can trust me. And he'll ask to meet her somewhere. If she's a minor and she's at home, most likely he'll have her walk to a park, or he'll have her ask her parents to take her to the mall, and then he'll meet her there, or somewhere that feels very safe and familiar to her. And that's how he begins to build the ability to pull her away from safety. I know all about you. And I'll share these pictures that you sent me with your friends online if you don't do what I tell you. And again, think about the mindset of a child who's maybe 14 or 15, even 16, 17. I mean, they just don't have the ability to consider all of the options and devise a plan and make a way to escape from this person. And if they're told that you do what I say, or I'll burn your grandmother's house down with her in it, they believe it, and they won't go to the police. They won't tell anyone. And a lot of times they're protecting somebody they love. And that's the really difficult part of this. But you as counselors, you as teachers, those of you who are in the lives of children, and you see them on a regular basis, you're the ones that are going to be able to see these things and have well, that's different. That child used to be different, and now they're like this, and log it and begin to find ways to find out what's really going on. We need money to build a life. You're already having sex. Now we can get money. If you'll just do it for me just this once. My 2 friends said they'd pay. Once he's had her do it, even once, then he can have a lot of control over her because it's easy to manipulate her. I'll tell everyone what you did. I'll send pictures, because lots of times these sex acts initially, these grooming and seasoning sex acts, they take pictures and they do videos. And of course, the minor has no clue. And then they show her the videos and they say, I'll send this to your teacher. I'll send this to your Girl Scout leader. I'll send this to your friend network. And I'll tell everyone what you did. Being with me is the only place you're safe. It's the only place you're accepted now. Nobody would want you back. And I'll even tell her that if she has a loving family, your family could never want you now. Look what you've done. Look who you are. This is who you are. And the sex acts, the filming of sex acts, that becomes a part of the extortion to control the child. And you don't want anybody to know this, do you? Do you want them to know who you are now? And then they go back to the loving, we can build a life together. I mean, there's so much emotional manipulation, brainwash that goes back and forth. These kids really do suffer from Stockholm Syndrome as well. So I'm going to take a breath here. I'm going to take a drink. Is there anything you guys would like to say, or a question that you've had sent in that you'd like to ask me?
I am speechless. It's such an ugly topic, and it's so hard to process. Mm-hmm. But as educators, we have such an opportunity because we are so involved with the lives of so many boys and girls, and you don't think it can happen where you are or to you, and it has happened.
Yes.
To me through my counseling experience. But Laura, it's a difficult situation to talk about, but we know as counselors we are the gatekeepers of social emotional, and that we're looking for these things, and this is you know, so what are some questions that some of the counselors that some of our friends have had that have asked, that we asked Joe?
Yeah, well, I've been making notes myself as you've been sharing, and what's standing out to me is how calculated this is. You said it's no longer the stranger danger, that we watch out for the strangers. And I know in one of the stories that I've heard you all share before, there was an incident at Brianna.
Yes.
Yeah. I'd love it if you'd share that story, if you could. But what stood out to me was that took 9 months.
Yeah.
It was a very long time, but they were patient and calculated. And it was I'm going to call it a double attack, because that's what blows my mind.
Yeah. I couldn't have paid you for that question, because that's a segue. My very next section is Brianna's story. So thank you for that, Laura.
Yes.
So Shared Hope is constantly developing tools to help you as educators, and then the public in general, to help keep kids safe. So one of our most used tools with students, which is junior high to high school, it was developed for like at age 13, but that was a few years ago, and unfortunately 10-year-olds probably are the new 13 with what they know and understand. So we always leave it up to the discretion of teachers and parents if they want to show this film to younger kids. I have shown it to 5th graders, but we generally start with 6th graders. But the film is called Chosen. And it was developed specifically to shine a light on kids who are not considered at risk. The 2 girls featured in this film were both straight A students, 2 parents in the home, cheerleader, athlete, youth group, doing community service. None of the signs that would say these kids were in danger, but they were. I want to share first about Lacey. Lacey was 13 when her story began, and she's featured in the film. I want to tell you about her vulnerability. Lacey was a little African-American girl. She had a mom and a dad. Her dad was deployed to Iraq. Her mom was working 2 jobs, and Lacey was left to care for her 2 younger siblings, a sister who was 10 and a brother who was 8. This guy watched her walk to and from school in bad weather. And he figured, latchkey kid. He saw her walking to the grocery store in the evening with her 2 siblings, and each of them carrying balanced bags home at night. And he thought, Mom must be working. So he watched her for quite a long time. Then he began to meet her wherever she was. Like Sunday afternoon, she'd go to a movie with her girlfriends, and they'd be all giggly and in their movie, and he'd be sitting 2 rows behind. Hi, she'd say. Hi. Her friends were like, who's he? Because he was like 24. And she said, oh, just some guy. He always talks to me. Of course, she's a little proud of this. And so she's like, yeah, he's really nice. And he'll show up in the grocery store when she's there with her mother and say hi to her. And her mother will say, who's that? Just some guy. He's really nice. Oh, Mom didn't have a red flag about that. And so he just seemed to be everywhere where she was. And at one point, she and a couple other little friends were down at the corner store after school, and there were some kids there, and they invited them to a party. It was in the summer. I said after school. It was in the summer, and they invited them to a party in a nice neighborhood. Lots of kids are going to be there. Why don't you guys come and bring your friends? And they thought, well, we're going into 8th grade. We're all grown up. We should get our first party out. And it's in a nice neighborhood. What could go wrong? And those words in that film always just make my heart skip a beat, because a lot can go wrong when you don't know who that person is. And so they went to the party, and Lacey was sitting and watching the others dance, and she was having a good time, but she just wasn't really into that. And so she was sitting on the couch, and this guy was very persistent. He sat next to her. He was very friendly, tried to engage her in conversation. She was like, whatever. And he kept trying. He was very nice, but he just kept trying to engage her. And she just wasn't really that interested in talking with him. And it was within about 2 weeks that she was in Starbucks, and he showed up, and he goes, I know you. No, you don't. And he goes, yeah, I do. I know you. And the next line is her saying, so I gave him my number. And this guy was 24 years old. She was 13. And that was when he began his process of drawing her in. And we'll share more about that story. I've shared bits and pieces of her story in the anecdotal stories that I've shared with you. Some of those were Lacey, the burning grandma's house and the dead animal in the mailbox and pictures of her sister. That was Lacey. So in this video also we have Brianna. And Brianna's vulnerability was she was the youngest of 5 kids. She was determined to go to nursing school. She wasn't sure where the tuition would come from, being the youngest of 5. Mom was a nurse, dad was a salesman, and she was going to make it happen. So she was already taking running start programs, college courses. She was a go-getter. This girl was determined she was going to work for that tuition. She was waitressing. She was 17. She was waitressing in the same restaurant next to the freeway, right north of the Washington-Oregon border, right off the freeway. Her sister was a hostess there. It was really safe, right? Safe environment where Brianna could be a waitress. And she befriended a man and his wife. Safe, right? I mean, they were like in their 60s. They'd come in together, super nice, really friendly. She was very gregarious, very outgoing. Brianna's got personality like spills over the top. Loved being with that girl. And so she was just sharing her whole life with him. You have a boyfriend? Yeah, I do. It's da da da. And she'd tell him all about him. And then later they broke up and she shared that with him. And she said something kind of creepy happened. It didn't ring a bell at the moment, but the guy asked for her phone number when he found out she'd broken up with her boyfriend of 2 years. And she goes, that's creepy. He's like 60, you know? And so she was like, ew. But she continued to be friendly to them and talk with them. And at one point they asked her, so what would the perfect boyfriend be? You know, you and this guy broken up, so tell us what your and so she's all bubbly about, oh, I'd love it. You know, he'd drive a cool car and he'd play football for some university. And I mean, he'd wear leather jackets and he'd have a really cool wristwatch and blah, 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 blah. As soon as she turned 18, within 2 weeks of her 18th birthday, because now she's an adult, the very perfect guy walked into her restaurant. That guy, I mean, down to the wristwatch, the whole 9 yards. And he was so kind and so friendly, and he gave her a number and he told her to call anytime. And so she started calling him. And eventually that grew into a relationship. Well, why don't you come to Seattle and visit us? It's about a 3-hour drive from where they lived. So she had to create a story because she knew mom and dad would never let her go to Seattle and meet some guy that she'd met in the restaurant. And so she just created a story that she was going to be with her girlfriend for the weekend. And then she told her girlfriend, I'm going to Seattle to meet these guys. Now, when they got close to, she got about an hour and a half south of Seattle, she called, and she's a smart girl. You know, she's like, oh, you didn't give me the address. Give me the address. I'll put it in my GPS. No, we don't want you to get lost. We'll come and meet you. Just pull off exit XYZ at the Harley Davidson, and we'll pick you up there in 10 minutes. So they were already down her way to meet her in 10 minutes when she was getting to that point. So she pulls off. One guy jumps in her car. The other guy gets, you know, he's in his car. And they drive her to this beautiful Victorian house on Lake Washington. Beautiful house. She didn't think about it. There were a lot of things that later should have rung a bell. They pulled in her car right next to the fence and the house, and the other car pulled up right behind it. She couldn't have backed out. She couldn't have gotten out if she wanted to. She didn't notice those things. They told her that she could stay upstairs. They had several bedrooms. Just pick a bedroom. She went upstairs, and there was one room that was hot pink, like bubblegum pink, had a round bed, had mirrors in the ceiling of the cover over the bed. And she goes, you guys are weird. Why do you have a bedroom like this? Because it was two like 25-year-old guys, 27-year-old guys. And they said, oh, he's got a kid. She lives in Phoenix. He let her decorate the bedroom. And Brianna just said, it felt weird. I felt like somebody was watching me, so I didn't want to stand there. But looking back later, she said there were no affectations of a child in that room. There were no bulletin boards with pictures. There were no teddy bears. There was no clothes in the closet. There was nothing that told you a child lived there, but that was their story, which she bought. So she stayed with them, and they treated her like royalty. And, you know, we want you to experience the life of the rich and famous. And And then she realized, and she's a very responsible girl, but her phone charger wasn't in her purse, wasn't in her car. She always kept a phone charger in her purse. So she tells the guys, we got to go to Best Buy or wherever and get a phone charger. No, that's fine. We'll just give you a phone to use. So they give her a phone. He says, give me your phone. We'll find a way to charge it. And so she has a new phone. He goes, hey, you know, if you want to, we'll buy you an iPhone. Now, they were brand new then, and they were upwards of $1,000. And she knew her parents would never be able to afford to give her an iPhone, but this was really tempting for her. And so then her phone rings in the possession of these guys, and he answers it. It's her mother. And he says, I'll bet you wish you knew where your daughter was, and laughs. And then the phone goes dead. So this is the position her mother was left in, knowing she was with someone, a male voice, not knowing where she was, and her phone and GPS was turned off, so they were unable to track her. So they immediately went to the police. They had to wait to do a missing persons report. You know that drill. So while she's in Seattle with these guys, they challenge her. Let's go to the strip club. And she's like, I didn't want to go to a strip club, but hey, I'm 18. I'm an adult. I can go to a strip club. So they go, and he says, you know, my girlfriend makes a lot of money this way. I mean, how much money do you make waitressing? She's like, about, $90 in tips every night. He goes, add a zero to that. The money you could make $900 a night with us. So she's like, oh, I don't know. And he said, well, my girlfriend danced, and you're on a stage. Nobody touches you, and the tips are great. And let's just go check it out. See if it's something you want to do. So they took her. And while she's there, they were plying her with all of the logic. She's like, what would people back home think? And they're like, nobody back home is ever going to see you. Yeah, you're right. I'm a long ways away. Nobody knows I'm here, blah, blah, blah. I could make money. They said, you could move in with us. She goes, well, what about my education? I said, well, we'll transfer your credits up here. I mean, they had all the answers for all of her hopes and dreams. So the long story and short story, she signed up. She didn't notice until later that he filled out all the paperwork. All she had to do was give her driver's license and sign. He had obviously done it before. And then that very weekend, she'd gone up on a Thursday night. That Saturday, she was dancing in a strip club, which would have never entered her mind 3 weeks earlier. And the second night, the first night, somebody offered her $1,000 to go home with him for the night. And she was like, whoa, I'm never going to do that, but that's a lot of money. The second night, she was dancing on the stage, and she looked out, and the guy from the restaurant, the couple, that guy was in the audience. It blew her away because he'd already asked her for her number. Remember the creepiness? And so she went backstage. She's like, I'm not doing this. And they said, don't worry, we'll always keep you safe. We're going to take care of you. And they took her and left right away. So she was restored to the safety feeling. Well, they had to return her car. I'm pretty sure these guys figured out that the car would be missing and the police could come after the car. And I think they felt pretty secure at that point, that she trusted them, that they were fulfilling her dreams, that they'd given her enough of a platform of promise that she was hooked. And so they said, call a girlfriend and ask her to bring you back. Take your dad's car home and have a girlfriend bring you back, and we'll give her $100. Well, she called around, and none of her friends could do it. So she called a guy that was a friend of hers. They were furious, but the anger only lasted for a moment. And then he controlled it again. He was looking for a twofer. He was going to get 2 girls for the price of 1. And so she said, I'll take my car home, and this guy will bring me back. So they're like, great. So she calls him. He's a good friend. His name is Evan. She mentions him in the film. And Evan, I'm going to bring my dad's car home, and I need you to bring me back to Seattle. He's like, okay, fine. But he asks her a few questions. Now, here's the amazing thing, and this is what I want to encourage you with. Evan had heard about the signs of trafficking from his father 2 years earlier when he was in high school. He was now a sophomore in college. He was dating Brianna when he was in high school. So he heard his dad come home from a Rotary meeting and share with his son what he had just learned in a 35-minute program in Rotary. It stuck in Evan's head. So that's why the tools I'm going to give you are so valuable to you. And you don't have to be afraid that, gosh, these kids will never remember it. Believe me, they can remember these kind of things. And when they need it, it'll come back. So Evan started seeing red flags because he was asking her who these guys are. Oh, they live in this beautiful house in Lake Washington, blah, blah, blah. Well, where do they make their money? I don't know. I'm not really sure. Well, what do they do for a living? Well, I don't know. I mean, they're always available. I mean, they're going to buy me an iPhone, and they're going to help me go to college, and da-da-da. And so there was enough that he thought, nothing can be this good. It's too good to be true. So he calls his dad, and his dad calls the Rotary president. And he says, I'm in over my head. My son suspects this. This is a girl. She's been a friend of the family. We don't know what to do. So the Rotary president calls his friend, who is Sergeant John Chapman, who's in the film. John asks some questions and says, she's 18. 2 weeks ago, I could have intercepted. We could have grabbed her and ran. He said, there's nothing we can do. She's an adult. So he called Linda Smith, who is an advocate. Now, Linda tells me all the time, she is not the hero in this story. The hero was Evan that set this intervention in play. And that's why we don't need to clone Linda Smith. It's illegal anyway. We don't need a Linda Smith to be effective. We just need to know, and we need to share it with kids. And I'm going to share some of these things with you, questions to ask, things to look for, ways to approach.
Okay, Laura. So we promised an emotional roller coaster ride, and that is one, right? I mean, that is some stuff. That's a lot of good information that we need to know.
Mm-hmm.
So what can we expect on this next podcast?
Well, can we unpack that one for just a minute? Okay. We talked about how, before we on our intro to this, we talked about how it's the bystanders.
Yeah.
And she said at the beginning that the victims say if they had only known the signs, if they had only known what to look for, then they wouldn't have gotten caught up in this. And I wonder about adolescents. I wonder about these students, because when you're in the thick of it and you've got these guys telling you what you want to hear, then I just feel like that teenager mind is saying, well, I would never get caught up in that. Or he's different. And I don't think they can see it for themselves. And so I think that's why it's important to share this with others, because, it was the lady that worked at the restaurant that saw what was going on. And it was Evan that helped Brianna come out of her situation. And, his dad had talked to him. His dad shared the signs with him, and he's a male. I think you need to share it with your girls, but he's a male and he shared it. And how grateful are we that Evan's dad shared the signs to look for with him at 2 years prior to that happening. And it stuck with him.
Yeah. But this is information I think that will stick with you.
Yeah.
So Laura, with all counselors K through 12, we have these mindsets and behaviors, and a lot of times we feel like these lessons, in the scheme of things, why is these lessons that we go in and do, even with K through 2, why are they important? But for a lot of students, their normal is not really normal, and sometimes until we make them aware of what safety is and those lessons that we do, that all leads up to knowledge for these students, and we want to put those things in while they're young.
The mindsets and behaviors are more than just something to check off that you've completed throughout the year. I would challenge any school counselor to make the mindsets and behaviors their mission, instead of just something that they check off a list each year.
Because it's so important, Laura, those lessons that we do on safety and,
digital citizenship, it leads into what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. So it's so important. Counselors, you are important to a life of a child. And this, we hope through these podcasts, it just increases your knowledge on what we can look for to help our students. Because as we know, Laura, it's happening in our community. It's happening in other big cities, small cities, rural, everywhere.
May I set us up for what we're going to hear next time? May I have the talking stick?
I'm passing you the talking stick.
Next time, when Jo comes back, she is going to be telling us in detail the signs to look for, and some of them were honestly surprising. Things that I wouldn't have thought of became signs and signals for me. She's also going to be telling us exactly what to do to report, and it goes even further than what I would have initially done. And so I was really encouraged to hear the steps that we can take as counselors to report this if we see it. So come on back next time.
Yeah, get ready for our next one.